You're listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I'm your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 160. In this episode of the podcast, we'll be meeting Gregg Olsen, who is a New York Times, USA Today, and Wall Street Journal bestselling author of nonfiction books and novels, most of which are crime-related. Gregg is an impassioned voice for victims and their families, and he's been a guest on Dateline, 48 Hours, 2020, William Shatner's Aftermath, Deadly Women, Good Morning America, NPR. It just goes on and on. It's a real honor to have him on my podcast. With more than 1 million copies sold, Olsen's true crime book, If You Tell, was Amazon's best-selling Kindle ebook in 2020. His latest best-selling novel, The Hive, was published on June 8th, 2021. As a true crime junkie and crime fiction fanatic, I was thrilled to chat with Gregg Olsen about his amazing career, his upcoming projects, and a lot more. So stay tuned for that interview coming up here in just a moment. First, a quick reminder, please go and rate and review this podcast wherever you're listening to this, wherever your favorite podcasting app is. I really appreciate it. You can check out all my links at thrillingreads.com/links. You can join my Thrilling Reads newsletter there, as well as getting all the links of where you can rate and review this. Check out my author website and all that good stuff. Here is my interview with Gregg Olsen. I'm excited to welcome Gregg Olsen to today's episode of the podcast, who is a New York Times, USA Today, and Wall Street Journal bestselling author of more than 30 crime books. His latest novel, The Hive, follows Detective Lindsay Jackman as she investigates a complex and puzzling murder case with a charming wellness guru at its center. Really excited to talk to Gregg today. Welcome to the podcast, Gregg.
Hey, Alan. Thanks for having me. And your listeners can't see it, but I'm looking at this charming picture of you taken 20 or 30 years ago. You're fantastic.
eight years, not that bad.
Oh, 8. Well, you look good for whatever age you really are.
Thank you. Yeah, I had to fess up. It's an old picture.
No, it's great to be on.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for coming on. And so can you just tell us a little bit of I guess the listeners are familiar with your background leading up to becoming a writer?
Oh, sure. I mean, I started many years ago, long before your picture was taken, where I thought to myself, why don't I try, I had a journalism degree. Why don't I try writing a book? What book would I do? I would do a book that I like to read, which at that time, Alan, I read a lot of true crime books. I was fascinated by crime and I read them as soon as they came out. So it was natural for me to like segue into writing true crime, which is what probably the first half of my career was all about. Interviewing people, getting their story, finding out, what really happened behind the headlines. That was kind of my forte, really digging in. And then after a while, the true crime market started to wane. And that was mainly due to TV. TV was sucking up a lot of crime stories. If you can remember, they were be on every night, 2020 or Dateline or whatever. So I thought, Mel, maybe I could try writing fiction. And I was lucky enough to be able to make that transition. And I love both true crime and writing a thriller. So that's kind of my background, thinking that, write what you want, what you read, and then segueing into something that I thought was a big challenge, which would be fiction.
And what was do you, I guess with the journalism background, what's the big differences for you between doing that switch from nonfiction to fiction, or did you find it liberating?
Yeah, I mean, there's good and bad to both. I love true crime because I love people. I love being able to get to meet people, and being a journalist or a nonfiction writer, for sure, you've got a passport into other people's lives. They just know they can talk to you, and they are telling you things that you have never heard before, or, that kind of thing. That really drives me to get that story. So I love that part of it. But it takes a long time to write a true crime book. As you can imagine, you have to talk to many people and look at all the records. So you have to get everything right. So it's, switching to fiction was liberating in that regard, because it just, what was ever in my head, like all of my experiences of interviewing, killers or victims or cops or whatever, like I carry all that with me. And this was a place where I could use it all in a fictional way. And that's, like you said, the word is liberating. It is fun to write fiction, but in my heart, I will tell you, it is more rewarding to write nonfiction.
And what do you think now with the last few years, especially with like the true crime podcast? Seems like there's a true crime podcast coming out every 3 seconds.
I know I'm working on one myself right
All
now.
All right,
so,
cool.
So
hey, I'm a junkie.
I'll have you on. There's been a huge renaissance in true crime interest in streaming, either whether it's Netflix or whatever, or a podcast. And that's really been interesting because, for a long time, true crime was like the ugly stepchild of any genre. And, when you went to the Barnes and Noble or whatever, you would go to that back section with, those horrible covers of, what they look like. I mean, true crime, it wasn't a classy move, but all of a sudden now, like everybody, your mom or your grandma or your wife or everybody seems to be a true crime fan right now. And it's the storytelling of the podcast that gets people sucked in. It's a little bit like old radio shows, I imagine, where you're listening, but you're able to kind of imagine a little bit on your own. And also you're taking it in when it's convenient for you. So I think all of those come into play with this huge renaissance in true crime.
Well, looking forward to your true crime podcast then, because I watched them on Netflix. I watched the documentaries on Netflix, and I listened to too many true crime podcasts. So
yeah, no, that's good. What is your favorite? Are you allowed to say?
Oh yeah, I think so. I think I'm allowed to say. There's one called Case Files, and yes. I like that one. I like that style. It's just kind of like here's what happened.
Yeah.
Versus there's a lot of them that are a little too much. I prefer that type of style than like the people like drinking wine and talking about true crime.
Right. There's that style where there's a lot of banter and all that. Mine is what I'm trying to develop is more along the lines of what I think you like, which is I really want to give people that inside look at the story from people who were in the story. So it's not just, me chatting away about something with somebody in it with a glass of wine.
Yeah. I like those a lot better too. Cause you get more into the story too. And that's supposed to be great with your background too. You know how to interview people and get sources and all that stuff.
Yeah, no, that's the part about, back to true crime versus fiction is that when you write true crime, those people are with you forever in your life. They trusted you to write their story, and you don't burn anybody, and you do as respectful job as you can. So they were with you forever. And then with fiction, it's like sometimes really, Alan, I can't even remember who the characters were from a book or two ago because I've already written 2 since then. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
By the time they come out, that it's harder to hang on, I think, to who these people are that I'm creating. So much easier when I sat in somebody's home, and cried with them or talked with them about something that happened. Those are indelible. And, I hear other novelists talk about their characters being so real. And I feel like mine are real at the time I'm writing them, but at the end, it's just a story.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's different than a document about somebody else's life.
Yeah, because there's been not a lot of people that have done what you've done to actually, like you said, sit down in a room with. I can't even imagine like talking to someone who's lost a loved one like that. So I can imagine that stays with you versus something you just made up.
That's right. And the thing about it is, you really learn. All of us thriller writers, we're writing it and about terrible things that happen to people, or hopefully, by the end of the story they get out of their jam or whatever. But there are those real people out there that have gone through those circumstances, and it is an honor to write their story. It's not a job. It is an honor, and it's a passion. So I never take that lightly.
And your latest book now is The Hive, which was released in June, and it's already, I see it in the top of all the charts already. So congratulations.
Good, right?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I was very intrigued with it too, because going back to the podcast thing, I had listened to a podcast about, what's that guy? He was like a self-help guru who like kills people in the in a sweat lodge.
Oh, yes.
And so when I saw what your book was about, I'm like, oh, so I was very interested to read in it, and it was great. But for the listeners, I'm getting way ahead of myself. Can you tell us a little bit? Can you tell us what the Hive is all about and how that came about for you?
Right. I mean, just like you, I saw that Sweat Lodge one, and then I watched the one on Nexium.
Oh yeah.
And there was another one that I started watching all these cult movies and streaming things. And I was really interested in that idea, like what a charismatic person that exerts some sort of influence, major influence, enough so that people will change their lives in order to be with that person or to advance that person's agenda. Like it really interests me, like how, like even on the Nexium one, how could, Catherine Oxenberg's daughter, just not, just fade away, not come back to her mom or talk to her mom or something. It didn't seem like there was a bad relationship. How is it that somebody can make people do things that, that you would never think anyone could do? So at the central part of my story is a woman named Marnie Spellman. Marnie is like a self-help guru type. She's, really in tune with nature and that whole idea of holistic natural products and health. And her idea, stems from a childhood experience where she claims that a swarm of bees had lifted her up and spoke to her. So there's a mystery and a mystical part of her story. But as the story advances and as the bodies turn up, you see there's a dark side to what Marnie Spellman was all about, what she was doing, and, how these other people, mostly women, became, enthralled with her and then very frightened of her. And that's really what the Hive is all about. The Hive is the name that the girls gave for their little group. She was the queen bee, Marnie, and the other women were, her helpers, and they made up the Hive.
Oh, okay. So that makes sense now how you came up with the idea. I was going to ask you about that. What's up with the bees?
Yeah, it's all about the bees, and and the curative properties of pollen and royal jelly and honey and all of those things. There's a whole world of study on what honey from certain plants can do for people, and she was tuned into that and built this basically a cosmetics empire. But her philosophy was, if I make you look better on the outside, you'll feel better on the inside. It was like an outside in kind of approach, which, a lot of her followers liked, and they moved from their families to be with her.
Yeah, I think this was really cool about this too, was like, because I think like not all these people like in all these cult stuff starts off like trying to do bad things. It just kind of like seems like it gets out of control somehow. So that was kind of fascinating to do that and look at the character, how it's been changing and the secrets and all that. That was a very, very intriguing part of the story.
I will tell you, Ellen, I thought of all people, Martha Stewart, when I was writing this book.
Yeah.
I was thinking about her, and I think I might have mentioned her name in the book, but it's like, here's a powerful woman who creates this incredible media empire, which we all know Martha did. And then she has this downfall where she does this insider stock trading thing. And it kind of makes you look at her in a whole different way. And that's kind of what Marnie is like in my mind. It's somebody who had it all and then made a terrible mistake, a foolish mistake, a wrong, evil mistake. And then in Martha's case, of course, she came back, hopefully, clean on her own. Marnie Spellman chooses a different way to get back to where she was. And that's what the Hive is about.
And so what inspired you now with a female-centric driven suspense novel like this? What inspired your decision to write a female-centric novel? And was there any challenges as a male to write in the female characters?
I don't really think so. I mean, I think that for me, most, probably 90, maybe 99% of my protagonists are female. And that's mainly because the genre that I'm in, the suspense drama genre that I've chosen to be in, is mostly female driven, and it's female readers. In fact, most of my readers, like 90, not 90, I'd say like 80 some percent of them are women. So I'm really writing to that audience, and I'm putting, what I've always felt, I put strong female characters in. My characters are, I look at them and I think, well, she's a woman, and she's doing this, but if you change the gender or whatever, and it was a man doing it, it would feel the same way in terms of their, there's nobody weak here. There's nobody subservient. It is the way, the way I raised my twin daughters to be whatever it is they wanted to be. And that's what my women are all about in all of my books.
That was fascinating too, because you're like juggling several storylines and timelines in the book. How do you keep all that straight?
Boy, I'll tell you what, that was a nightmare.
Is that your first attempt of doing that?
Seriously, that was a nightmare. And I've always had problems with my timelines, and my readers know that. It's when I write a book, I have the idea and I know what I'm going to do. But I find that that I'm always as interested in the past as much as I am in that narrative that's driving the reader to the end. I care about where these people came from. So I've got a lot of, information I want people to have. And that, I think, comes from my true crime background, in that when you wrote a true crime book, it couldn't be just a victim. You had to have the reader see the victim as a person. So I do give a lot of attention to backstory. So there was a lot of juggling in that case. And of course, one murder happens, 20 years from the first murder. So I've got this back and forth a little bit of the 20-year cycle going on too. You got through it, Alan. You liked it.
I made it. I liked it. I got it. Yeah. Yep. I saw it. I wasn't lost or confused. Nope. You nailed it.
Okay.
And so now, as from a technical side too, I'm always so curious. Now, how do you write your books with Word, and do you keep track of everything with Word or note cards? Or
I'm so old school, Alan. I do note cards that I do, of course, use a computer to write. Yes, a laptop, but I do all that. I don't use any of those tools that a lot of writers use that graph the characters and all that kind of stuff. What I do is I have a note card, and when I have an idea of what the character is like or what might happen next, I write it on the card, and I revisit my cards. I mean, it's all throughout the writing process. I'm looking at my cards and I look, okay, I used that idea up, or I did something like that already. The card is out. My hope is by the end of the book that I've really pulled through all those cards, those ideas, and used only the good ones, and have not very many left when it's over. But I've often taken pictures of what my work looks like. And I mean, I have a table and a floor covered in cards and papers as I'm pulling it together, thinking, what would be better next?
Wow.
So, I'm probably, more, they do plotter and pantser, those terms, and I would be more of a pantser, although I start with an idea of what the plot is, but I really do let those cards and those ideas take me to where I need to go.
Before you start writing a fiction book, how much research do you do? Because especially with your background, is that a problem? When to stop, or do you do a lot of research?
I don't do that much research. Most of mine are domestic, so there's not too much that I can do. In every place that I've written about, I mostly write about places in the Northwest. Lummi Island is this central point of most of the action in The Hive. And that's an island, north of Seattle. I visited it and I've been to it many times. And I used to go to school in Bellingham, which is the big town near there. So I always write about places I've been and that I know very well. And I love writing about the Pacific Northwest because I think there's such diversity in our geography and our climate. It doesn't rain all the time, like everybody says, but it's gloomy enough to be tonic for those people that are writing the kind of stuff I write.
Yeah, and a lot of famous crimes and serial killers come from that area.
Oh,
the Pacific Northwest. What's up with that?
We're super good at that. We really, really are.
Yeah, those were the first best true crime books that I read was Anne Rule. I think that was her name, right? Yeah, she wrote that Ted Bundy one. I was blown away. I was like, oh, this is it's like fiction, but it isn't creepy.
No, I know Anne. Anne was a friend of mine, and she was great. She, I really looked up to her, and she helped me a lot. That's one of the things about, starting out, is finding somebody that is more seasoned than you and that can give you some pointers or whatever. And Anne was great. She was super, super kind to other writers.
Yeah, that's great to see it in the community too. Like writers always wanting to help each other out, even if the might be competitors or whatever. But
right,
so it seems like it's a good. They're still like helping each other out.
I know, we're always happy until somebody's more successful.
You're like, dang it.
Yeah, and then of course we know it won't last forever, so they'll be back down.
Yeah. And so what's your process then like when once you're into writing a book? I mean, do you write every day? Do you have set hours, or what's your process like?
Yeah, my process is, I recently retired from a job I had for 20 some years at Boeing, where I was a writer. So I had to do all of my writing, Alan, on the weekends, which made me really, really disciplined. And my process was this: I'd go to rent a cabin or do something, and I only had those 48 hours to write. I would, write. Every time I wrote 1,000 words, I'd take a break and give myself a treat of some kind. The treat could be a walk on the beach or something, or it could be, by the end of the day, it was a gin and tonic, whatever, and I'm racking up, I set a goal. I'm going to write 6,000 words today and 5,000 tomorrow, and I'd get it done. And that was really like the way I did it. And since I've been retired, when my editor's not going to like this, but I have a book due in a few weeks. I hope to God I get it done. But when you have all the time in the world, it's harder to carve out that time you really need, if that makes any sense.
I've heard that before. The people think, oh, now I'm gonna have all the time in the world. And it's like,
and I can't get anything done.
Yeah.
So yeah, my process is I get up very early in the morning. I like to work very early. And by about 4:00, I'm done. And I look at my material the next day to see, very cursory, to see where I kind of was, and maybe I tweak it a little bit, and then I'm on to hitting that goal, whatever that goal is. And it's always a word count goal.
That's so impressive too. So you wrote If You Tell when you still had your day job?
Yes.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky there in that there wasn't too much travel on that one because it was a local story and it was a true story. But yeah, I've written them all with a day job, basically. My first few books, I was, self-employed as a author. And then it came time to send my kids to college, and I thought I got to get a real job. So that's what I did. And it was only going to be temporary, but I liked it so much I stayed.
Yeah, well, that's the best of both worlds. If you like, if you like what you're doing.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And so most of your books now, they're like standalones. Do you like doing that? Have you ever thought, what are your thoughts on writing a series compared to a standalone?
I've done a couple of series, and I do actually prefer a standalone. In fact, it turns out that my standalones usually sell better than a series book. So I probably won't do another series. I'm doing one now that wraps up in another book. But I think, like I have maybe bigger ideas that I want to write about that should be like a one and done.
And what are you working on now then?
I'm working on, I have a true crime that I'm working on right now. It's about a serial killer from Spokane, Washington, that basically, 3 prostitutes were murdered. No one could solve the case. Finally, when DNA analysis had proved to be more fruitful, they ran the clothing and the fingernail scrapings of one of the victims back through the system, and they got a hit. And it turned out to be a woman in a prison in Texas and they thought, how could this be? The DNA was from semen. How does this track to a woman? It turned out that the woman, Donna Perry was her name, but she had previously been Doug Perry, and she had gone to Thailand to have a sex change because she wanted to stop Doug from killing.
Oh, and wow.
So she went and had the full surgery and then got in trouble again and ended up in prison. So she said, I did it to stop Doug from doing it. And it's a really interesting case. It's, obviously we hear a lot now about, transgender and how, this is a situation where Doug, in the early like 90s went off to Thailand on his own to have the surgery. Not much was really known about it the way we know about things now today, or what was the psychology behind it all. So I think it's really an interesting story, and topical because of the gender identity issue.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. I'll have to check that out for sure. Yeah. And so, with regards to the fiction books, when you decided to switch over to fiction, were you a fan of thriller, crime type books that were fiction before you started to write them?
Yes. I mean, I really liked I always say that the one who made me think I could do it, which is such a joke because she's so good, was Patricia Cornwell in her early books. I devoured them and loved them. And I thought, I could maybe try that. I think I read Michael Connelly. I read, people that were popular in the genre. And what were people buying? What were they taking to the beach to read? What were the books, that maybe, somebody wouldn't say they were great literature, although I would say they are, but that kind of thing. I want to know what was popular and why. And those are the books. I love Stephen King. I just loved any of those books that you would find in that top 10 at your supermarket. Those were the ones I was after, Alan. I wanted to read all of those.
Then I've also been asking now because of what we've gone through the last year, how, in fiction work, how are you planning to address the pandemic, or are you not worrying about that right now?
I'm not even going to mention it. I'm pretending like it never happened.
Yeah, most of the writers I've interviewed are doing that. So I think I have COVID fatigue.
I mean, it could be interesting that maybe down the road somebody will write a great novel about the pandemic. But I just think I'm done with masks. I mean, I'm vaccinated and I'm fully sanitized wherever I can go. Yeah. But I don't want to put it in one of my books.
Yeah, it was weird. I just read John Sanford's Ocean Prey. No, not Spray. Yeah. Whoa, I
love his cranberry.
A Freudian slip there. Yeah. But yeah, Ocean Prey. Yeah. And right at the this is not a spoiler in the book, but right at the end, he was like, "Oh, there's this thing called COVID," So I'm like, "Oh, well," it kind of like jarred me like out of the story because I'm like, "Ew."
Right. He just threw it. He was typing along. I think I got to end this thing.
Yeah.
I'll mention COVID with a little like, what is this thing? And then the reader will get, wow. But I'll have to check out Ocean Spray. That in the frozen juice aisle?
Yeah, well, the Ocean Spray isn't that good, but Ocean Prey is pretty good.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. So I always like to, the last question I like to ask my guests, it's always because I know I have a lot of aspiring writers that are listening to this, and I know it's kind of cliche, but any advice for aspiring writers listening?
Well, yeah. And what I tell any aspiring writer is this: it's a job. It's something you have to do every single day to get where you're going. And that's the page that I preach to everybody when I see people and they're starting out. It's like, don't talk about it, do it. And of course, read everything you can. But I always say, write every single day, even if it's only a sentence. Put something down on paper or, on screen, because that's always going to move you forward to your goal, which is whatever that finished page or that story or that poetry or whatever it is about. It starts with that one line. Got to do it every day.
Great. That's great advice. And where can the people find you? What's your, like the best place, your website?
Yeah, my website is notorioususa.com. Come on and check it out. I've got a lot of cool stuff out there. And of course, If You Tell is like in the top 4 or whatever on Amazon right now, with The Hive around number 65, I think. So they're up there. And I'd love for people to, try them both, because, they're both crime related, but they're very, very different. And I would love to hear from my readers.
Yeah, I noticed about that about If You Tell, because that's been out a couple of years, and now it's like gangbusters again.
It's not. There's no stopping that book. I mean,
How does
seriously.
that feel? Does that must feel kind of surreal? Or
It does. I mean, I looked at it like I used to like ask my editor like the night before, like the charts on Amazon charts. I'd say, are we going to be on tomorrow? And I don't ask anymore, but I do get on at night and check. And it was on again this week for the 85th week in a row.
Wow.
Number 4. So, I think about that. I think, wow, this book really does have legs. And, in my wildest dreams, Alan, I never thought I would write a book that would last like this one has. And I think it's a worthy story for it, for sure, what the sisters went through. But it also shows us, like when we are having hard times, like the pandemic, maybe reading about somebody that has it worse than you is something people want to do, because it was the number 1 bestseller for Amazon last year, which is the year of the pandemic.
Yeah. It's kind of like that when everybody was watching The Tiger King, everyone was watching something different. Something
That's right. I forgot about The Tiger King. That was good too.
Yeah, it was. All right, Gregg. Well, thank you so much. The Hive is out now. Highly recommended. And If You Tell also, that's both are doing so wonderful. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you.
I enjoyed talking to you so much, Alan. Thanks for asking me.
Thank you for listening to Meet the Thriller Author. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with one of your favorite writers of mysteries and thrillers. Or if this episode's guest is new to you, I hope you give their books a chance. Helping listeners discover new authors and books is one of the coolest outcomes of doing this podcast. As always, you can head over to thrillerauthors.com to sign up to my Thrilling Reads email list. That way you won't miss out on any great deals in thriller and mystery books. You can also check out all the links and resources in the show notes for this episode over at thrillerauthors.com. And also please do subscribe to this podcast if you haven't done so already, and leave a rating and review wherever it is that you're listening to this show. If you have done that already, I thank you. I really do appreciate your support. For my other links to my author website, social media haunts, and more, check out thrillingreads.com/links. All my links will be on that page. So that's it for this episode. See you next time, and stay safe out there.